Welcome back, everyone. We are on our way on our NDIS journey today, and now we are revving up empowerment in the NDIS. Since it began, a fundamental principle of the NDIS has always been to promote choice and control. This panel will investigate how empowered people with disability really are in asserting these principles through the NDIS. Our goal translated into support through planning, and as reasonable and necessary refer to the need of a participant or the NDIA's bottom line. Let's hear what's really happening on the ground.
Strengthening Disability Advocacy Conference 2017, getting into gear for the NDIS journey. Revving up empowerment in the NDIS. Did you feel like you had choice and control during the planning process?
So I have two boys with autism. I have an 11-year-old and a 3-year-old. So my 11-year-old Sam, he's very severe with his autism. So he's still non-verbal, has a lot of meltdowns, a lot of head banging, a lot of aggression at school, different problems. He has a lot of anxiety. So we had the planning meeting for Jackson for his NDIA plan, and he'd already been doing this therapy. We brought our evidence, we brought our reports and everything that we thought we needed to prove that this is what he needed. And I know I could kind of tell by their faces that it wasn't going to happen. And they even told me in that meeting that I have the right to appeal. So I didn't take that as a good sign. Before I even heard back officially, they're telling me that I can appeal it. So I knew it wasn't going to go our way, that initial planning meeting, and it didn't.
Did you feel like you had choice and control during the review and appeals process?
The appeals process was very stressful. It was very daunting. I've been told that no one in Australia has been approved for this therapy without going to the appeals process. And I don't know if they kind of count on the fact that people won't appeal, that they will be too daunted or too stressed or not understand the system and not take it that far. Our appeal, it was a lot of work and it was a big waiting game, but in the end we were very successful. We got almost full funding for Jackson to come here for the next 12 months.
It's really, really difficult, even for us in advocacy, to work out what it is that the NDIA see as a significant change in circumstance for somebody. There's no time frame for the NDIS to come back with an answer. On average, the participants are probably waiting anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks.
Our case was that if the NDIS thinks it's reasonable for Liam to go to this program 5 days a week, it's reasonable to fund him to get him there and back. The transport policy makes no sense, because to put it into our world, if I said to you, right, I want you to sit down tomorrow, work out over the next 12 months how many hours you're going to work, and then I want you to work out from that how much petrol you're going to need in your car, because that's the way the policy works, is you get this much money for how many hours you work, not for how far you've got to travel, how many hours you work, right? And I want you to put all that money into an account, only touch it for petrol, and if you run out before the year's out, too bad, don't go to work anymore. So I really thought it was important not just to fight it for Liam's case, but for everyone in the system that needs this support and doesn't have a voice.
Do you feel that reasonable and necessary is a helpful definition to describe support needs?
The judge came down to say that the sentence in the Act where it says if a support is deemed necessary and reasonable, it shall be funded, means it shall be fully funded.
I guess we're yet to see where that's heading in terms of how the NDIS will respond. Now, they have appealed that transport case, which means that they're appealing the reasonable and necessary.
Strengthening Disability Advocacy Conference 2017, getting into gear for the NDIS journey.
Unfortunately, our facilitator Trevor Cowell is quite unwell and unable to make it to the conference today. Surprise, surprise. And sends his apology to you all. However, today we have Liz Wright stepping up to the plate to facilitate today's session. Liz is the access worker at Maribyrnong Council and also hosts the Are You Looking At Me show on 3CR. So please give a warm welcome to Liz Wright.
Hello everyone, how are you? How's the conference been so far? Great, good to hear. Forgive me if I'm a little underprepared. I have large print notes and I'll try not to stumble through them, but Trevor is ill and I am a last minute ring-in, so be kind. Okay. Are you going, oh, sorry, I thought you were introducing everybody. That's what my notes were saying, sorry. Are you happy to do that, Melissa? Oh, you're the interpreter. So you're a blind woman talking to an interpreter who's interpreting for deaf people. This only happens in this environment. Sorry, Melissa.
So, first I would like to introduce Leah Kativa. She is the CEO at the Wright Information and Advocacy Centre. She also has a lived experience of caring for a daughter with a disability and as such has an understanding the need for advocacy and support for people with disabilities. She's also one of the amazing actresses you see on our videos today. Secondly, I would like to introduce Tess McCarthy, Coordinator of the Policy and Research Unit of the Office of the Public Advocate. Tess has been involved in the disability sector for the past 8 years in both personal and professional roles and is keenly interested in social inclusion, law reform and decision-making arrangement for people with cognitive impairment and mental ill health, particularly in relation to NDIS matters. So I'm sure she has a lot to share today. Last but not least, Gary Kerridge. He is the NDIS Senior Local Area Coordinator at Brotherhood of St. Lawrence, so please be kind. His particular expertise has been in deafness, including deafness and mental health, and he's worked across a variety of roles in disability. He is a well-known advocate and social commentator across the disability sector in Australia. So over to you, Liz.
All right, so we've got the comedic stuff out of the way. We're all here now, we're all introduced and we're all not talking to interpreters out of place. Tess, I'm going to start firstly with you today. It'd be really great if you just gave a one-sentence overview of your role at the office.
I'm Tess McCarthy, I'm Policy and Research Coordinator at Office of the Public Advocate, and we undertake systemic advocacy on behalf of people with disability and gathering data from the program areas, including Advocate Guardian program and Community Visitors program.
Great, thank you. Tess, I'm really interested in knowing what state-based kind of mechanisms do we have in place so that people who are, navigating the NDIS and attempting to do plans, what do we have in place to prevent people from being open to risk of exploitation or neglect or abuse in any way? If you could talk on a state-based level, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, sure. I guess firstly I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past and present. I also want to acknowledge the personal experience and expertise in this room. I look forward to discussion later also. So I guess I want to talk about some state-based mechanisms, both regulatory, but also then personal and community-based as well, that are currently operating in the transition to the NDIS, so prior to the National Disability Insurance Scheme Quality and Safeguards Framework being implemented. So I guess we're talking about enabling choice and control and then balancing that with freedom from abuse, neglect and exploitation. And in terms of regulatory framework, we've got a variety of things that, well, pieces of law, I guess, and policies that operate at the state level. And these include community visitors, which is a volunteer program coordinated by the office. And the key objectives of community visitors are to protect the people whom they visit from abuse, neglect and exploitation, also encourage social inclusion. There are a variety of other roles. The Disability Services Commissioner plays a role in complaints handling, conciliation, investigation. We've got the Senior Practitioner who plays a role in authorising and monitoring the use of restrictive practices, but also a variety of other roles. There's a variety of legislation, including the Disability Act, the Guardianship and Administration Act, which establishes the office for whom I work, and Victoria's Public Advocate is Colleen Pearce. We provide guardianship services, advocacy and investigation, and we coordinate 4 volunteer programs as well. So other pieces of legislation, I won't go into too much detail, but they're still relevant to protecting the rights of people with disability, include the Mental Health Act, the Supported Residential Services Act, and 2 really important pieces of legislation which set an important human rights discourse, which I think is really important for advocates to be aware of so they can use it as an advocacy tool in their discussions with whomever it may be. That's the Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities Act and also the Equal Opportunity Act. So there are also a number of national, and I should also say that important independent bodies, also the Ombudsman and the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission, who are always strong advocates in this area and can assist, I guess, where approached, and keep at it. The important national policies and practice standards, the National Disability Strategy, the National Standards for Disability Services, and various Commonwealth laws. So I won't get into the NDIS too much yet. But I guess another really important advocacy tool, which you all would know backwards and forwards, is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, and they're acknowledging that it's a really important human rights instrument, and it's already been brought up today. And I guess it really speaks to the question that Lizzie asked in balancing kind of choice and control, being equality before the law, and balancing protection from abuse, neglect and exploitation. So they're 2 key articles and principles in the Convention, and something that my office really deals with in our provision of guardianship services, where we may make a decision on behalf of someone and it may be related to NDIS matters. And I guess the way we approach that is ensure that it enables safety, protect someone where they may be at risk, but also ensure that we ascertain the wishes of the person and respect those wishes as well. But I guess often what it can really come down to as well are personal and community-based mechanisms, and I guess that's where all of you fall today. Importantly, people with disability as self-advocates and peer supporters have a role in promoting choice and control. And in addition to families and carers who can play a really important role for people. And then there's independent advocacy. So everyone here, and I encourage everyone to keep having a loud voice in this area. And we certainly recognise the stress that independent advocates are under, and also, the resource kind of focus and administrative burden that comes with the NDIS that can take attention away from other really important advocacy matters for people with disability. And that's in a variety of ways, whether it's housing, whether it's justice system, and the like, I guess. So I guess to conclude, with the transition to the NDIS and a little bit of what the National Quality and Safeguarding Framework is looking like now, is that we'd be worried that it can become overly kind of complaints-based, and without access to properly resourced advocacy, as you certainly know. But I guess I can say that the Public Advocate's taking a stance on this as well to advocate for that. Really, people's choice and control could become restricted and their rights not enabled. So it's a really important part of the scheme. I know that, you know, there's been some recognition from state and federal governments to various levels of the recognition of advocacy, and I just encourage everyone to keep at it. I know you're working harder than you need to be, but it'll be worth it.
We will be talking more about advocacy on this panel with Leah as well. On the national front, there's the quality and safeguarding framework that's being developed at the moment. That's supposed to provide a consistency nationally, but it's not ready to be rolled out until 2019 at the end of the complete rollout. I guess I was going to ask you what the strengths would be, but I think what do you see the gaps might be when this consistent framework is actually there for people to utilise?
Yeah. I guess I could probably speak to a strength in the intention that we do want national consistency. And for Victoria, we've got a strong history of advocacy, of a human rights approach, and a strong system of regulatory and community-based rights. So it would be great if that was available in other jurisdictions, really. But I know that we're worried that what we have now will be lost, or at least decreased in some ways with this new quality and safeguarding system that will be rolled out. So I'm sure, as many of you are aware, the framework has been announced. It has a variety of kind of natural safeguards, but then also more kind of regulatory safeguards. And there's a quality and safeguarding bill before Parliament, and it's currently under inquiry. So they'll report soon. I think it was a September reporting deadline, but I'm not sure if it'll get there. And they're having public hearings on that as well. And basically that bill establishes the independent National Disability Insurance Quality and Safeguarding Commissioner. As Gabrielle referred to earlier today, there's certainly a lot of questions being challenged about the independence of the Commissioner, and really the need for it to be more independent from the federal government, particularly its complaints function and its investigation into reportable and more serious incidents of abuse as well. They've got a variety of functions, this new Commissioner, which isn't decided yet, but they include a registration function, a complaints function, a behaviour supports function, and also oversight of policy setting in relation to worker exclusion schemes. So that's all in one. It would be great to, at the risk of too much regulation, independence is really important in this area, and I still think there's chance for change, so keep advocating because it's not decided yet. But I guess something also that my office would see as a real gap is the role of community visitors. We have over 400 volunteer community visitors in Victoria. They're independent safeguards. They visit houses where people may live, where they may not have any other supports in their lives, and they report back both on serious incidents of concern, but also on community and social inclusion. And they could be a real key monitor in, are these plans being implemented? Is a person receiving the supports that are in their plan? What are the gaps for this person as well? And then, the possibility to then, understand how best to work with the advocacy sector to enable people with disability to get, the most out of the scheme is I guess one thing this framework is that's a gap there, I would say, at the moment. And I guess really at the framework, in the future discussions, both Gabrielle was saying this as well, practice standards and rules, they're not developed yet. So to report on a bill is very difficult. But in any development of that, the first people that need to be consulted with are people with disability, people who will be affected by these laws and regulations, the change in the system, and then also bodies, active and advocates, families. Just like it was, Kristen was saying, the reason the campaign was successful was because it was driven by people with disability who are affected by this and know the most, and should have the largest say. So I think that's the same in this quality and safeguards framework as well.
Thank you so much. Now, Leah, I'm turning to you to ask you about what internal review processes do we have in place so that when people are engaging with the NDIS and working on their plans, put in what they think is reasonable and necessary for their life, their independence and their choice, they get knocked back. So what's in place and how do people work with that system to get what they need?
I think it's really confusing for people to start with. The wording of the whole process for review is complicated. We have what's called a plan review, then we have a review of a reviewable decision, then we have an external review. And people get very confused about what they should be doing first. And I've got to say the goalposts change all the time as well. So in some areas they're told they need to do a plan review before they can do an internal review. And then in other places they're told forget the plan review, go straight to internal review. See, I'm
wary now hearing that because it makes it, it seems exhausting engaging with a process that you want to get right and get on with it, and there's review. It's
I know, and you know we've fed that back that whole wording maybe needs to be changed, and I think they've actually changed plan review, and I think it's coming out to change of circumstances rather than plan review. So they are working on that. But yes, you can. We often work with advocates often work with people to do an internal review, and the internal review is pretty much putting down on paper why you think it was unfair that it wasn't in your plan, and giving your lived experience reasons for that. And we always make sure that people give their lived experience reasons. It's really important. And then to go through that process, it's a independent delegate that looks at that. It's someone within the NDIA, but it's someone that hasn't looked at that plan before. So it's an independent person that looks at it within their system. And then if they decide, of course, that it was justified, that they're not going to fund it, you have the option then to appeal through an external review through the AAT process. So that's quite involved as well. So prior to the rollout, the government funded what was called NDIS appeals people, and that sat with advocacy agencies mostly. It's been rolled out a bit further now, but so what you have to put in an application to a central assessment processor, and in that application you have to show why it's complex and novel before they'll fund legal support.
So at this stage, are you getting free advocacy
yes,
support?
It's free.
Yeah, okay.
And the application to the CAPS, it's called CAPS, once that's put in and it's approved, then legal aid is free.
Okay.
And the legal person will work with the advocates to go through the AAT process. So the AAT process is also quite long. It starts with a teleconference, and there's actually 3 steps. So there's 3 stages of the AAT process, and the very first stage is really just stating the facts about the case, and each party talking about where they're coming from. The second stage goes to a conciliation process where everyone gets together and provides more evidence and talks about how they can conciliate the process so that everyone's happy. And if that's not decided in that process, you then go to a public hearing.
So you said this is a long process. What would be an example of the length of time this takes? And I'm sure there's people in the room going, I can tell you, already, but...
Well, from the very start of the internal review, it could take, there's no limit on the time that the NDIS have to do the internal review. So for a participant, when they first get told that they first have to appeal their decision of the first plan, they've only got 28 days to get their application in for an internal review. once it's in there, the internal review and the NDIA don't have a time limit. They can take anything from a month, and I've had some that have gone for 8 months.
So that seems interesting to me, that the onus is on the participant in the scheme to be timely, get their complaint in or their query in within a certain period of time, but the NDIS doesn't have the same onus of response. Is that correct?
That's very correct.
Okay.
Okay. And then once it's gone through the internal review process, you once again have to, is it 28 days, guys, to get it to the AAT? Yeah. Oh, sorry, 3 months from the first, and then 28 days to the AAT. And if you haven't got it in by then, there's usually a jurisdiction hearing to see if they can still hear the case. So often what happens is people get their internal review back and it's declined, and then sometimes they don't know what to do after that. I mean, usually the letters will state you can now apply to the AAT, but it really doesn't spell out where they can get help or support to do that. So they flounder and they're in shock for a while and they're devastated. And then by the time they actually think, oh, I better do something, the time can be gone.
So there's nothing in place for those letters that are returning to people not to have included within them a brochure, a pamphlet of where free advice, advocacy and support could be sought. No, there's nothing in Barwon. They did. We actually, as a network called VicDan at the time, did produce a brochure with all the advocacy agencies that they could use, and I believe that was given out at first. But I know REAC as an organisation often takes their brochures down, but no one ever says they get them. So it's really interesting.
They do say though on the letter, so you get a decision letter and it does state you can go straight to the AAT that gives the number, that sort of thing, but it doesn't actually tell you you have the right to ring a support person, and that the NDIS support person is there just for that, to be able to support people through the process. And you don't have to use a support person, you can go straight to the AAT, but you need to go through and prove that your case is complex and novel to be able to get support through legal aid.
Okay, thank you, Leah.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. Yeah, it's okay.
And look, you can see people's faces, and when they come to you, they're devastated usually. They really are devastated, and they're looking for support, and our job is to really listen, remind them that they've got rights, calm them down, let them know we'll support them through the whole process, they're not alone. And just really give them, what their rights are. And there's a whole deficit in trust with the NDIA at the moment. It's not a budget deficit, it's a trust deficit. And that's, advocates are dealing with that all the time. We're not counsellors, but we're dealing with traumatic cases all the time.
Well, these are people's lives, so of course it's traumatic and real, and it is catastrophic when people are held up.
It's catastrophic to those families.
Yes, it absolutely is. I'm going to move on to another question, but I've enlisted Tessa's help to read the little preamble to it because, as I said, I am a ring-in and I would actually like to get the principles right. So if you could read that, Tess, that'd be fantastic.
So, General Principle 13 of the NDIS Act states that the role of advocacy in representing the interests of people with disability is to be acknowledged and respected, recognising that advocacy supports people with disability by promoting their independence and social and economic participation, and promoting choice and control in the pursuit of their goals and the planning and delivery of their supports, and maximising independent lifestyles of people with disability and their full inclusion in the community.
So how does this work in the complaints arena, and how do people in the planning stage get to the stage where they can actually make their complaints? And I know we've touched on this, but how do people get through this and be able to make their complaints against the NDIA or disability support services if they're not getting what they want?
Well, I think people get confused also about should they make a complaint or a review.
Yeah.
And often the complaint's about they feel they've been treated badly or they haven't been given the respect that their case warrants. So the complaint process is through the internal process first. So once again, usually if you go to the Ombudsman, he wants to know that you've already done it within the agency first. And then if you're not satisfied with the result of that complaint, you can go to the Ombudsman or you can go to the Disability Commissioner.
Yeah.
And as you can see, the Ombudsman, the complaints have gone out of the roof over,
Yeah.
skyrocketed. And we try to work with those agencies as well, but it's really, really important that people remember that they own this scheme. They're the ones that own the scheme, not the planners, not the delegates. We own it. The community owns it, and it's good to challenge. It's good to make a complaint. We've had over 50 cases in the at the AAT, and that's been people being courageous and challenging the scheme and changing the scheme. And that's how you change the scheme in lots of ways, is by challenging, being courageous. And some of the hearings have changed how the scheme operates. And we're going to see how it changes with the McGarrigle case, particularly as the reasonable and necessary supports are now meant to be fully funded under the federal ruling. So,
Great. Thank you. That brings me to you, Gary, and I'd like to talk to you about reasonable and necessary. So the term reasonable and necessary applies to participants, but is it reasonable and necessary about what participants in the program actually want to get, or is it about the NDIA bottom line?
I'm not sure I should give you the true answer or the diplomatic answer, but as I'm an advocate, in my past life, I will give you the real answer. Now, reasonable and necessary, how it's defined, I will tell you quite honestly, I don't know. And I am a planner. I'm a senior local area coordinator. I do plans with participants. And just before we get on to reasonable and necessary, I'll give you a bit of background information, so give me a little bit of leeway. So I'll come back to reasonable and necessary. But as a planner with BSL, we do what we call full planning. We have a conversation with the participants, we meet them face to face, we look at the system, we find the best support for them, we discuss it with them, and we try to develop the plan with the participant from the conversation. The way other people do the plan, the NDIA, other agents, how they do the plan is different. Some of them do it over the phone, if you've heard. Some of them do it using an outcomes questionnaire. Some of them generate some of the plan on the computer using the data. And what that means is that the outcomes of different plans are very different across the board, and which is why you see a lot of reviews. Now, I have never done a plan as the NDIA do it, or as Australia Health Alliance do it. I have never done one with an outcomes questionnaire. I've never done one over the phone. I've never automatically generated one on the computer. So I can't tell you what happens when that happens. I can tell you, as I do it, it's done with the participant. And I think the data shows when you have that conversation with somebody, you have less review. So when you can actually get their input and you get it into the plan and have them involved actively in developing that plan, it works better. So that's what I give you a bit of background. As it is now, the NDIA have recognised that that pathway is not quite effective, and they're currently reviewing it, and they're trying to come up with a better system so that it works better where conversations are there. When that will be ready or whatever, I don't know. I know they've been looked in Canberra for the last few weeks, looking at it, consulting, researching or whatever, and I'm hoping into the future these different sort of variations of planning will change and they will be more consistent. Now, coming back to reasonable and necessary, we here in Australia, this is Gary the Advocate talking, one of the few countries, or possibly the only country, that bases a law on reasonable. And whenever you have a law of reasonable, you will always have subjective judgments. I can't really see how you can decide reasonable. It always comes back to the person. It's either prescribed or it's somebody's opinion on what is reasonable. Now, I'll give you an example using death plans, because I do a lot of death plans. I do plans for brain injury, physical disability, whatever, but I'll use a death plan. I have one particular participant who is a very, very bright woman. She's been to university, she's got degrees, she started a PhD, pulled out, whatever. A very, very bright woman. She has chosen in her life to do a lot of voluntary work, working with animals, working with fauna, or working with growing food, organically, whatever. Volunteers her time for the community to teach people, be out there, just making things happen, a really active member of the community. She's done that off her own bat for many, many years. And now she's decided, okay, I've got the NDIS. I want to use the NDIS so I can do this better, so I can use my skills to train people, make them better active members of the community. So her contribution to the community is immense, really immense. So we worked out how much interpreting that she would need, Auslan interpreting that she would need. Now you have not-for-profit organisations, you have big organisations that can possibly cover some of the costs. So when you're working out this reasonable and necessary, you're always looking at all those things. What can a community organisation provide? What can't they provide? Have they got capacity? All of that sort of thing. So reasonable and necessary is never clear-cut. But getting back to my participant, she needed, we worked out 342 hours of interpreting per year for her to do her job effectively. And she's given her time, she's contributing, I don't know how many thousands, possibly millions of dollars to the community. And we came back with an answer of 90. So you've gone from 342 hours, and once it's gone to the NDIA, it's been knocked back to 90. How you come up with that answer, I do not know. I don't think it's always necessarily about the bottom line, no. Yeah. It is about sustainability, because the NDIS has to be sustainable, but how they work it out, so what's fair or what's reasonable, I couldn't tell you how that's done. They have typical support packages, I've never seen one. So it's all a little bit of a fairy tale in terms of reasonable and necessary.
Yeah, because reasonable...
If it was me, I would be more prescriptive, but that's what we have to work with.
Yeah, because whenever the term reasonable comes up, the counter is always unreasonable. And that seems to be kind of where there is sort of a thing of, you know, what, you're at 342 hours, well, we'll just divide it by 4. You know, it doesn't make any sense. What's the rationale? Sorry, Leah.
Under reasonable and necessary, I think there's 5 points that you have to meet, and you have to meet all 5 of them before it's deemed reasonable and necessary. So I can't remember exactly what those points are, but they're all listed in the Act. And if you don't meet 2 of those criteria, then it's deemed not reasonable and necessary.
Okay.
But if you meet all 5, it's deemed reasonable and necessary.
Okay.
So it is spelled out a bit more.
But do you still believe that it could be subjective?
Oh, God,
yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sorry to ask the obvious question.
Tess, if I could just come in here just very briefly. When you look at reasonable and necessary as well, and if you're looking at the Act and the NDIS law, the NDIS principles, a lot of it was about investment. So when you give somebody enough support, it means they can give back. It means if you give somebody enough support, a carer, for example, you give their child, their adult child with a disability enough support, that carer then gets out into the community, invests, works, buys things, uses their time and so on. So if you're going to work out a reasonable and necessary formula, well, you have to work out how much you're giving and how much comes back. And the Productivity Commission said it's all about an investment and it all comes back to the community. But I think that particular principle has been lost in translation somewhere.
Yeah, investment is key. It's absolutely key. You don't look at, I think often the welfare word has been bandied about and people taking and being given to rather than an investment in and then an investment back into the community. I completely agree with that, and I'm supposed to be subjective here. No, objective, sorry. What would you arm advocates with here, Gary, at the beginning of the process, when they are going in to support someone? What would you say are key for them to be able to work with people as they're in the planning process? You know, you're an advocate from way back. You know some key things to talk about.
I would say the pre-planning part is very, very important. And you need to be looking at how the NDIS are thinking, how the NDIA think. So they're thinking about community participation, they're thinking about capacity development, and those are the two important things. If you have a lot in your plan that looks at developing capacity, and you can justify that capacity with enough evidence to say that somebody over time can catch a bus, or someone over time will be able to feed themselves or get dressed better. Somebody over time, through using an interpreter, will make friends, their mental health will be better. All of it is about that pre-planning and developing your arguments and getting the NDIS to understand what you need to be involved in the community and develop your capacity to be in that community. An advocate can help that, but you need to think about how the NDIS is thinking and use the language that they use and prepare. Have evidence. Go in there with the evidence. Unfortunately, most people with a disability are not advocates. They're just people that are living their life. So when they get their letter from the NDIS, for them it's an exciting new thing. They have no idea who to contact. They just put their trust in the planner. And planners, by and large, are good people. I work with them, and the people at BSL are good, experienced people. But you need to be prepared. You need to have the evidence there. And you need to start thinking like the NDIS think. And if you can do that, you're part of the way of getting a good plan developed.
Thank you, Gary. We're going to open to questions on the floor. Obviously, I can't see any of you, but the roving mic people will have you all well in hand. I guess you've been putting up your hands to get the attention of roving mic in previous sessions. So, and direct to any of the panellists here on the stage today. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great.
It's Pauline from Amida. My question is to Gary again, I think, and possibly to Leah. I like your idea of think about how the NDIA think, and in terms of reasonable and necessary, do we have any policy examples of how they think? I know with the transport, they're obviously thinking, and their policy was 75% is all we'll cover. What other policies have we uncovered that give us some indication of how they're thinking?
I can understand how people will be cynical about how the NDIA think, and I've had arguments about the travel issue as well. You need to think, the NDIA will think about the bottom line, sustainability. They will. Whether we like it or not, they're going to look at that. They will look at capacity building, and they will look at getting people out in the community. They really want that to happen. They're not bad people. They're not mean people. They don't deliberately make decisions to make it difficult. But they have a principle of saying who's responsible, the informal supports, the mainstream supports, what do we fund, and so on. So every decision they make, with transport they would say, well, what is reasonable for somebody to pay compared to somebody else. So the way they're thinking is always along their lines. With the transport issue with the guy in Colac, I've argued this for a long, long time. This is a guy who lives in Colac, he's got no public transport to anywhere, his ADE is in Geelong, he's nowhere else, he hasn't got lots of options, he can't just move and live near Geelong. It's the cost of his disability. Under the legislation, we cover the cost of his disability, we pay it. And that's knowing the acts and thinking like them, that's how you can win. But you have to be a really strong advocate to do that. And as I said, not everybody is a strong advocate, but advocates need to be thinking along those lines. And we are told as planners, follow the act, follow the act, follow the act. So know the act, know the legislation as much as you can.
Can I
Another
just
question?
add
Oh, sorry,
something to
Leah.
that? No, can I
Go
just
on.
add something to that? What we've found also, and learnt from going through the court processes, the tribunal processes, sorry, that they really want people to think about what the general public do and what's reasonable, so everyone's buying an iPad. So you can't ask for an iPad really because that's what everyone does. Transport, it's reasonable to think that most people pay for their transport costs. And this was what comes back to us a lot. So that's how they're thinking, and then we have to show the other side of that and why that's not reasonable to expect.
Another question?
Thank you. Julie Phillips, Disability Discrimination Legal Service. I don't know who wants to respond to this. I've only made a complaint to the NDIS once, which is not because I know a lot of happy campers who receive funding, but just because it's the only case I've been involved in. And we were unhappy with the plan, and I sent an email to the planner. No response. I sent a second email to the planner, no response. I sent an email to the complaints line, no response. I believe I did that twice. Then I went to the Commonwealth Ombudsman, who eventually responded and said that why didn't I call, and they would not accept my complaint because I should call. And at that stage, people were giving me horrendous stories about how long they'd spent on the phone trying to contact someone. And at that stage, I gave up, and I'm pretty tenacious at the best of times, but I just couldn't be bothered anymore, spending any more time on it. That was 1.5 years ago. I'm still waiting for a response from the complaints line. And I'm just wondering what you think about empowerment of advocates and people with disabilities when you feel that the complaints process underneath you is so poor that you're pressured, if you like, sometimes perhaps to not get the best that you want because you've got an inaccessible complaints process, or one that takes so long that it's virtually inaccessible.
We've had the same problem. It's very difficult to even make contact with anyone. When it first rolled out, you're able to actually contact the planners, and that really worked really well. But in the last year or so, they've given us an email address that we have to send all complaints to, and you rarely get responses back from that. So, we've had to go and sit down in the office till someone sees us. It's got to that point, but I agree with you. It's what's the word? It just, you stop continuing, you get frustrated and you just stop continuing to feel empowered at all.
Gary or Tess, do you have anything to add to that?
I guess I would add that even as the Office of the Public Advocate, where we have the position of the Public Advocate, we also find it difficult, and I know it would be harder out there on the ground as well. A recent example of, some success we had was when the Public Advocate presented at a public hearing of one of the Joint Standing Committee into the NDIS inquiry, and she raised a particular matter, and they really engaged with this matter. And so, because of the Public Advocate's position, I'll acknowledge that, it was able to go on the public record. The committee really engaged with this matter, and kind of publicly the NDIA were held to account. It was one of the complex matters that crisscrossed a number of service systems, the justice system, disability, kind of mental health, and so it was like highly complicated, but I guess the fact that Colleen has a loud public voice and it was on the record, they were engaged with it by virtue of a lot of the public attention. That was one successful example that we've had, and that the person for whom we're representing, because of this long process that she had to go through, there's not always good outcomes, and traumatising is a good word.
It's very traumatising.
Yeah.
I don't know that the staff on the ground realise the trauma, but as advocates we face it every day. You might too, I'm not sure, but it's really burnout type stuff for advocates as well, because you don't see change. You only see it when you go through that long tribunal process. We rarely have the chance these days to make contact and just build relationships with the NDIA, which would settle so much stuff really easily, but it doesn't happen.
Gary, would you like to comment as well?
Yeah, I'm going to step out of role here, not as a worker, just as a person with a disability, as a deaf person that's been involved in the sector for a long, long, long time. I would like to ask Australia and the system to stop asking me to complain. I would like the system to develop some protections for us, which the law actually helps us. And I am fed up of a system which relies on it being activated by me complaining all the time. Now, very recently I had an issue with a colleague who I was talking to on Skype, and she asked me to call her. I pointed out to the colleague that I could not call her and that I needed to continue this conversation by chat on Skype. And she just disappeared. She just disappeared, went off, and apparently I found out later that she'd resolved the issue, didn't bother to let me know, and I'm left hanging all the time. And a colleague said to me, "You've got to complain about this, you've got to complain." And I just said, "No, after 30 years, I'm just fed up of complaining. It's time for Australia to really clean up our law, our disability law. I'm really sick of complaining."
Wow, I agree. I agree too. I'm sorry we've run out of time today. I would really love to thank you, the three of you, for being here today. Leah, Gary and Tess, thank you very much. I'm sure the three of you are available to speak with people after this session. There seems to be a lot of trauma and grief in the room on something that had so much promise, and I agree with you, Gary, around protections rather than complaints, because it puts us in a deficit all the time to be demanding what is essentially a basic human right. Anyway, off my soapbox. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd also like to add a big thank you to Liz Wright for taking this on the 11th hour like so many other people today. But you know what, we're all sick of complaining, aren't we? But such a minefield of things to think about in terms of protecting us that are in the most vulnerable position, and also learn how to positively take control of the process. So thank you all for your contributions.